Good evening, everybody. I'm very glad to be here this evening with Turkish Kant Society members. And we have a very distinguished guest today from Center of Kant Studies in Germany, Margit Ruffing. Welcome, Margit. We are very pleased that you join us, and we are very much honored. I would like to make some notes before we start. First of all, the whole session will be recorded, and then it will be put to YouTube so that other colleagues or friends or our students can listen to it and can see it also. The second one is I will be very pleased if you all mute your microphones, except Margit, of course, so that there is no distortion during the meeting. Now, I would like to introduce you Margit Ruffing, first of all. Margit and we studied together in Mainz many, many years ago. We studied together from 1977 to 1985. Margit studied philosophy and comparative literature and Italian literature. And she is, since 1994, at the University of Mainz in the Department of Philosophy. She is working there. She is the director of Kant Research Center. She is also the copy editor of Kant Studien. Kant Studien is one of the most famous philosophical periodicals in Germany. Since more than 100 years it's published, and she is now the chief copy editor of Kant Studien. She has been teaching in various countries like Brazil, Italy, Spain, and Slovakia. She is updating the Kant bibliography since 1993. And she is the editor of the proceedings of Kant congresses, the 10th one, the 11th one, and the 12th one. I hope, Margit, that you and I, before we get retired, we make some Kant Congress also in Turkey. Well, we'll see. We'll see. It's never too late to make the preparations. Now, she is in the board of directors of Kant Society, Kant Gesellschaft in Germany, also Schopenhauer Gesellschaft, Schopenhauer Society, also in board of directors. And she is a member honoris causa of Kant Society in Brazil. She's mostly, of course, dealing with Kant, but mostly the anthropological perspectives of Kant's philosophy in his philosophy of religion. And she has lots of books and articles and many critical articles on Kant philosophy and about international writings and books, and so she is updated in every sense if we are talking on Kant and his philosophy in the modern times. She is also teaching at the University of Mainz, still in the philosophy of department and Department of Philosophy. And at the moment, she is teaching on Wilhelm Dilthey. She's having a seminar. So now I think we can start. Margit, thank you very much once again joining us. Now you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, for your very friendly introduction. I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I thank you very much also for the invitation. I would have liked to come to see you personally in 2019, but it was not possible for us to meet, and then the pandemic situation. So now we have at least this way of seeing us by Zoom. And I apologize the audience. Good evening to everybody. I apologize. I I hope that my English is understandable, because it's not my favorite language. As you heard, I'm working more with French or Italian texts, and so I'm a little not so confident in my own abilities. So I hope we have a good communication here. And perhaps another word to the introduction. I'm not a director. I'm managing director of the Kant Forschungsstelle. The academic director is Professor Pollock, and he gives his greetings to you because he's very proud of our team at the Kant Forschungsstelle working internationally. And what concerning my research, normally I'm very busy in editing and in working on the Kant studies and on the bibliography and so on. So sometimes I sum up the results of my my work with the students, workshops, and so on. And this is one I present to you that I did together with the students to give an introduction in my position in the anthropological worth of the concept of community in relation to Kant's political and religious philosophy. So I'll start reading, and I hope you give me a sign if anything is technically or with my pronunciation not so good that you understand, and I try to do my best now. Okay. Ethical and political community is the subject of my presentation. The Kantian concept of community offers valuable clues to Kant's philosophical anthropology. In particular, I would like to discuss two aspects of this key Kantian concept. Point one is the significance of human self-understanding as a fundamental condition, and secondly, its connection to Kant's theory of religion and progress as an end of human action, not an empirical effect. In order to reveal the inner relation between both aspects, I would first like to consider what community means on Kant's view. I will then consider the implications of this concept for the concept of religion. First, Kant's view, human self-understanding not be considered in isolation from the critical view of theoretical cognition. I would therefore like to consider the dual role played by the category of community as a concept of the understanding, as both a fundamental element and an indication of an a priori human consciousness beyond or prior to the individual. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant presents the formal or logical category of community, by means of which we are able to recognize the existence of various substances. The essence or essential meaning of objects that can potentially be judged to be various cannot be known by means of this category, however. Comprehension of the meaning of this category via reason requires that we represent objects in space and time. Thus, the judgment that two objects are identical or different presupposes, on the part of those objects, their existence. On the part of the subject, the category of community enables us to cognize objects as being separate from another and from us. This category is the only one that implies the structure of intuition, Anschauung, i.e. our sensible grasp of external reality, and the existence of empirical objects is a condition of its possibility. Thus, in the context of his theory of cognition, Kant asserts that the logical category of community does not allow us to penetrate the essence of human existence. Restricted to a formal function, the logical category of community is not sufficient for understanding the essential meaning of existence under spatiotemporal conditions. But at least this category gives the formal account of thinking about diversity and unity by disjunctive judgments. In this situation of essential ignorance, the impossibility of knowing the essential by means of our intellect, Kant nevertheless recommits us to ourselves rather than a divine being. The latter opinion having been adopted by Leibniz, the great metaphysician with whose ideas Kant often engaged. Kant criticizes Leibniz for insisting on a divine being to explain the concept of community, a divine being who, in according community to the substances in the world, guarantees the identity of beings in spite of their diversity. In other words, according to Kant, human consciousness is already sufficient for understanding community as an existential structure to be realized in and by individuals whose senses perceive their own existence just as they perceive the existence of others. The comprehending consciousness, or the understanding, forms these perceptions or sensations in the same way that intuition does. Thus, the community of extended in space and thinking substances already lies inside the conscious human individual as a being endowed with body and soul. So far to this theoretical issue of community as an a priori concept of understanding. According to Kant's theory of cognition, a complementary aspect may be added to this conception of community as the a priori basis of empirical knowledge. The possibility of concordance, Übereinstimmung, in judgments of experience, a possibility already structurally given in human cognition and consciousness, as well as the categories of the understanding. Kant also speaks about this notion of community concerning the conditions of the possibility of judgments of experience in the context of his theoretical philosophy, in the transcendental analytic of the first critique and the prolegomena. Moreover, this possibility of logical concordance comprehends and conditions the possibility of an intersubject approval, Beistimmung, that is related to the aesthetic judgment of taste, which deals within the critique of judgment. Thus, the formal category of community is the foundation of a kind of general consciousness. The formal character of the category of community is complemented now by a content, namely the content of sensation, which as a sentiment is integrated in judgments of taste, generating its specific sentiments of pleasure and displeasure. We can therefore assert that community expresses itself in judgments of taste as concordance or approval in relation to the judgment, permitting of a certain generality or indeed a subjective universality. Subjective universality. With these theoretical aspects of the community in hand, I would like to fill out the notion that human self-understanding is based on the idea of community. I will consider what we might call the practical aspect of the idea of community. Practical because the concept is developed in connection with the theory appropriate to human beings as rational beings. The methodology of the second critique clearly demonstrates that human moral consciousness arises from the common human understanding or common sense. In short, human morality does not require theoretical or speculative knowledge. Rather, it is constituted by nature, the nature of practical reason, to be precise, as the moral interest in the human mind. The end of morality, the ideal community of more human beings, is unthinkable without practical reason in its expression as gemeiner Menschenverstand, or common human understanding. Hence, with regard to both theoretical and practical reason, the concept of community is, according to Kant, an epistemological condition of human self-understanding. Consequently, community as an ideal or real union of human beings is a central element of Kant's political and moral philosophy. Another argument for this position may be the following. In both theoretical and practical contexts, a judgment that something is objectively true must be communicable. Put differently, self-understanding and conscience are rooted in the efforts of physically isolated human beings working towards mutual comprehension and mental community. The commandment to tell the truth, or negatively, the commandment not to lie, we all know this is one of the most important commandments in Kant's ethics, is likewise bound up with community. It is a condition of the possibility of mutual comprehension and mental community for human beings. Therefore, lying is not only a kind of capital sin in Kant's ethics, but veracity and truthfulness are also claims of real philosophy and science. Now the second point concerning ethical and political community. When we speak about ethical and political community, we must consider Kant's religion within the boundaries of mere reason. Consequently, we must also deal with Kant's theory of religion. The term ethical community is to be found only in this text, when Kant defines the ideal human community as an ethical one. By contrast, he uses the expression gemeines Wesen, common, not ideal human community, but just Gemeinwesen, also in political sense, in various lectures on logic, metaphysics, and moral and juridical philosophy, e.g. in Logik Blomberg, Moralphilosophie Collins, and Power, where it is used as a synonym for the general good or welfare, and in Naturrecht Feierabend, where he uses it to refer to a human community under laws. The attribute called political is used as a counterpart to ethical only in the religion, in the context of Kant's explanation of the ethical state of nature, ethischer Naturzustand. I quote, "A juridically civil political situation is the relation of human beings among one another insofar as they are jointly subject to public juridical laws, which are, one in all, coercive laws. An ethically civil situation is one where they are united under laws free from coercion, i.e. bare laws of virtue. Thus, the political situation refers to the relation of men among themselves, where each stands under civil juridical laws by force. This is necessary to sustain everybody's outer freedom. Non-coercive laws of virtue, however, characterize an ethical civil situation of everybody's own accord, of her own free will, to promote the unification of righteous persons. Furthermore, another quote, in an already subsisting political community, all political citizens are, as such, nonetheless in the ethical state of nature, and are entitled also to remain in it, because for the political community to coerce its citizens to enter into an ethical community would be a contradiction in adjecto, since the latter, the ethical community, in its very concept, carries with freedom from coercion. Both kinds of community arise from a corresponding state of nature, and both differ from the state of nature in the sense that their members are subordinated to laws. Members of the political community to externally imposed judicial laws, members of the ethical community to freely adopted laws of virtue. Thus, the members of each are unified in a certain society, which is characterized by specific civil or moral laws. It would seem that political community under civil laws is fundamental to the ethical community. But there is no way to transform a political community into an ethical one by judicial means. However, because humans must leave the ethical state of nature and join the ethical community of their own free will. While civil laws may be differentiated according to the specific state of a politically developing society, the laws of virtue concern the complete human species and have a universal character. Therefore, we must always refer the concepts of ethical community to the, I quote, ideal of an entirety of all human beings, end of quote, which is what distinguishes the ethical community from the political. Consequently, Kant writes of an ideal that represents the veracity of this ideal, the idea of a supreme moral and intelligent being or God. People who adhere to the ideal of the ethical community belong to that being. Indeed, the title of the third paragraph of the division 1 of the third piece of Kant's writing on religion demonstrates the conceptual coherence of an ideal that is central to morals and religion. The concept of an ethical community is the concept of a people of God under ethical laws. In the second critique, according to the dialectic of pure practical reason, the moral law requires a law-giving instantiation of pure reason, God, as the supreme moral lawgiver representing the moral law in human reason. In the religion, Kant adds another argument. Individual human beings are not able to unite their faculties to produce a common effect. In this case, the achievement of the common purpose of reason, the promotion of the highest good in the world. This is an empirical fact. We therefore need the idea of a supreme moral being if we are to maintain the idea of an ethical community, if we are to believe in the morality of human beings. We might also speak of holding to be true instead of believing. And when it comes to the content of this moral belief, we can indeed speak of faith. It is fitting here to examine the concept of religion offered by Kant in his philosophical interpretation of Enlightenment positions. As I hope to show, this interpretation defines the religion of reason in a way that provides a basis for the construction of a public moral space. This aspect will be revisited at the end of my paper. Kant undoubtedly held that the rational aspect of religion is to be distinguished from the rational faculty of cognition involved in theoretical knowledge, which, as is the case with understanding, is limited to experience. He consistently emphasizes that what he is actually talking about is a, I quote, pure faith of reason, related to the philosophical notion of für wahr halten, assent, or holding to be true. In the methodology of the critique of pure reason, this faith is a sign of a differentiated and developed consciousness, in contrast to opinion. It is a pure faith of reason which, when, I quote, when operative, praktisch, is what truly constitutes religion in every faith. End of the quote. The faith of reason as one of human reason's specific attitudes or faculties precedes religious faith. Insofar as it is operative or practical, it constitutes what we call religion. Again, there is a reference to consistent theoretical and practical cognitive functions in human consciousness and self-understanding. Nevertheless, Kantian religious faith and religion have a very abstract and formal character compared to our usual use of these terms. We must therefore note the differences between two kinds of religion in Kant. The religion of reason or natural religion on the one hand, and the historical or institutionalized religions on the other. The Kantian conception of religion is based on a broad and abstract concept, on an idea of reason that, while real in terms of its conceivableness, excuse me, and its possibility, it's not real in terms of empirical or historical fact. At the beginning of part 4 of the religion, entitled Concerning Service and Counterfeit Service under the Dominion of the Good Principle, or of Religion and Priestcraft, Kant defines the object of his analysis by differentiating his concept from historically given forms of religion, as his title suggests. The non-empirical definition of the concept of religion leaves no doubt that religion must be considered not a factual and contingent phenomenon, but the expression of one mode of human self-understanding. In this regard, it concerns an anthropological constant. This formal definition is followed and completed by another, even more material definition at the beginning of the division 1 of part 4. Religion is subjectively considered the recognition of all our duties as divine commands. In a long footnote, Kant writes that, I quote, with this definition, some erroneous interpretations of the concept of religion in general is obviated. Concerning theoretical cognition, religion does not require any esoteric knowledge because our knowledge never extends to suprasensuous objects such as God's existence. But this definition presupposes an esoteric faith, practical and hence free, says Kant, which, I quote, with respect to the object toward which our morally legislative reason bids us work, end of quotation, makes us hope for the effectiveness of reason with regards to its final aim and intention. This indeed is simply living according to reason and its law, from which moral maxims, the laws of virtue, are derived. It's precisely this conception of religion that helps us to understand the concepts of ethical community and invisible church, Kant uses as synonyms. Visible churches are the result of human efforts to realize the ideal of a people of God. As historically conditioned and empirically given institutions, visible churches also correspond to political systems just as common governments respect, more or less, the law-giving will of a people, or the volonté générale, as Rousseau would put it, visible churches try to institute the ethical community on earth. Indeed, it seems that visible churches and political governments face exactly the same difficulties. Under the limited conditions of human existence, both the realization of the legal political community and the actualization of the ideal ethical community are continually frustrated. As such, both states and visible churches require a continuous process of reformation, for both are founded and operated by human beings. The sublime, never fully attainable idea of an ethical community is greatly scaled down under human hands, Kant remarks, namely to an institution which, with respect to the means for establishing a whole of this kind, is greatly restricted under the conditions of sensuous human nature. Kant continues, to found a moral people of God is, therefore, a work whose execution cannot be hoped for from human beings, but only from God himself. Thus, we can be required by the idea as nothing more than the visible church, which displays what the moral kingdom of God on earth, inasmuch as the latter can be realized through human beings. End of quote. This actual union of human beings striving for the ethical community is comparable, to a certain extent, to a political community striving for constitutional legality for its members. As the only possible form for actualizing the idea of the ethical community, the visible church, like the political community, needs a constitution. One according to the moral laws of reason considered as divine laws. Hence, the structure of the true visible church is neither monarchical, nor aristocratic, nor democratic. Since a reasonable political government has nothing to do with one's inner revolution in thinking, we cannot expect the implementation of universally and necessarily obligatory moral rules in a political constitution. The ideal of a form of government, the republican representation of a general will, refers only to the judicial guarantee of outer freedom, formulated as the only fundamental right of man. In describing the church's constitution, Kant suggests the example of a household using the metaphor of a family, I quote, under a common, though invisible moral father whose holy son stands in blood relation with all members of the family. It's well known that Kant sees in Jesus the personified idea of the good principle or ideal of moral perfection, archetype of the moral attitude. This is presupposed to understand this metaphor. That is because the inwardness of morality corresponds only to the ethical community, metaphorically represented as a family, not to the political or civil community, even where it is represented ideally, i.e. as a republic. According to Kant, human beings need the security that comes with having legal status, Rechtszustand, if they are to realize and develop their theoretical and practical reason, including science and morality. However, it is the inner disposition to be good or evil that secures the possibility of moral progress. Thus, the realization of the possibilities or transcendental truth given by reason depends, on the one hand, on the establishment of outer conditions that make a moral life possible, including the formation of a visible community of the state or the church. On the other hand, what is required is a moral revolution concerning one's inner disposition or way of thinking, and a continuous practical reformation, which can be initialized by Aufklärung, Bildung, and examples of those with good moral character. See the methodology of the critique of practical reason, where Kant explains how to proceed in teaching morality. On no account can we mix outer and inner freedom, political requirement and moral law, or juridical force and individual insight in the moral law in the service of creating a better world. Therefore, according to Kant, there is no way for human beings to judge the empirical development from nation states to a world republic. We can know, however, the inner development of our consciousness, thus achieving self-understanding as a being with moral faculties, a self-understanding that implicates the faith in the good in people. In a marginal note in the manuscript of the Anthropology, Kant comments on the moral progress of humanity, asking, are human beings becoming better, worse, or simply maintaining their level of morality? It seems that he does not know the answer. This note refers to a passage where Kant claims that nature's strongest drives, sexual love and love of life, represent, without any effort of reason, a superior reason of nature, of God, invisibly caring for the universal best. Thus, the life of the human species as a whole is continuously preserved, even though the species intentionally works towards its own destruction by war. Nevertheless, according to Kant, more cultivated individuals imagine a state of happiness for humankind in the coming centuries. The well-known problem of Kant's theory of progress, whether political or moral, is the lack of empirical correspondence. Nevertheless, I think it would be useful to deepen our understanding of Kant's conception of religion as a means of better understanding the complicated, antagonistic political situation in which world religions currently operate. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margit, for this conference. You brought us through the theoretical aspects and then to practical aspects of the community. And then you came finally to one of the last works of Kant, to religion, and there where you had questioned the ethical community, the people of God, and the visible church. So I think there will be quite a lot of questions here. I see already some hands. I will be very happy if our colleagues who want to ask a question, raise hand. You have the button there, or you can also write in the chat part your question. So now we can start. Who will be the first? I don't see any hands. Yes, Sania, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Margit, for a wonderful presentation. So my question is, it might be a clarification, question of clarification, because I'm not sure I understood your point correctly in two parts. So as far as I understood, you suggest that ethical community is slightly different, or not maybe slightly, radically different from political community, because the ethical community is universal, but the political is not. If that is correct, then I'm going to ask, well, I mean, aren't we talking, I mean, isn't Kant talking about the cosmopolitan stage, where we are talking about the universal stage, we are all subject to the same laws. Supposedly that's going to be an ideal, but isn't there universality there? So in that respect, universality wouldn't be a distinguishing feature of these communities. Would you agree with that, or how would you respond to that? I have another question too, but maybe we can go one by one.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. It's always the necessity to distinguish outer and inner conditions. And the universality of the ethical community lies in this inner moral law. We all know under the title of the categorical imperative, which on the way by adopting the own maxims to universal understanding and aims, brings in a certain way universalizability with this in this point of ethical community. And so you have always to distinguish the empirical world and this inner situation of human consciousness, where he speaks again of this revolution of way of thinking and way of judging and changing the maxims in a way that the moral law, which he calls also divine law, because of its unattainability by humans. It's more than the human consciousness may create. Just we can try to reach as an ideal. This inner situation of the moral consciousness is in so far universal because it's guilty for all, or it's you find it in the species of humans. So you cannot prove this empirically, but this is a point of the conception of reason, theoretical and practical reason in Kant, and therefore I try to show that the concept of community is as well a logical category in theoretical philosophy as also a kind of community, both ethical and political. But the political community is not necessarily moral and cannot be morally, just insofar as the politicians are moral humans, and if they are not, if they don't try to live their morality also as politician and moral aims in political contexts, we don't find in this outer world moral freedom, but just this situation of coercion. And therefore you have structurally, by the concept of community, you have similarities, but you have concerning the content, you have both parts of a coin, so to say. I don't know if it's this you like to clarify, but
Right. I mean, maybe, so this is actually your response is related to my second position about the relationship between political community and ethical community. You, at one point, you suggested that political community cannot turn into an ethical community, or did I misunderstand it? Because it seemed to me that the whole point of the history is, it seems, to turn these political communities into an ethical community. So maybe my point is, of course, I don't know from empirically if you're a moral agent or if you're following the rules, let's say political and ethical, let's say, rules out of utilitarian reasons, for pragmatic reasons. But the fact that I don't know this doesn't mean that you're not acting freely. I just can't know if you're acting freely or not, right? But it is possible that we have just political laws and just leaders with, legislating just laws, and that we have political community turned into an ethical community. But from a practical point of view, we don't know if we are just a bunch of selfish people who don't want to go to jail, or really moral people. So it seems to me that rather than, maybe you would agree with this, that rather than a metaphysical distinction, it's an epistemic distinction, this political community versus moral community. So that's, I think, my main question. Is
as far as I see, Kant says it's not possible to develop one in the other. They are, because ethical community is nothing else than an ideal. And an ideal is not, it's not possible to realize it in form of a political community, because you're in political communities, the point is always freedom. You need laws which coerce others to respect the freedom of each other. And in an ethical community is just the ideal, and the ideal of this people of God, which empirically doesn't exist as Kant sees. And so you can, as an individual and as a human being, naturally you try to get better. Naturally, you try to develop your dispositions, and one of the main dispositions of humans is their reason, and this implicates also that you are able to live your morality. But you are right; it's not possible to see this or to prove this empirically, and therefore it has to be just an idea, just not as diminutive, but nothing more than the way of thinking and the way of this inner situation of consciousness and an inner attitude. And there's no form, because the form of an ethical community would be an invisible church. This theory of religion, following this theory of religion, and if people try to realize this invisible church, they build empirical churches, historical religions with in form of a church, and this is as well as every political form of a or constitution of a state is always to be optimated. Because humans are making this institution, it's already not the optimum of the idea, and therefore you have this similar structure comparing political communities and visible churches. They are all reformed.
Okay, thank you very much, Margit. Thank you, Sania, for the questions. Any other questions? Now I don't see any more hands. In the beginning, there were some more hands.
I think they were applauds, but yeah.
Stefan, please.
Yes, thank you, Margit. My question is quite simple, and it may be that it's not directly relevant to what you addressed in the paper, but I hope it's relevant. And that is simply that in your view of Kant's theory of community, do you see him arguing either that the religious community should ideally lead to a political community, or that a political community should ideally lead to a religious community? Or are the two simply independent and unrelated? In other words, do you see a progression from religion to politics or politics to religion? Or do you think they're just two, like apples and oranges, and that they're not meant, not meant to be compared to the same?
Thank you for the question. You need a link between both. You have no directly relation between religion and politics, but you have this construction of visible churches, maybe. And what always means progress in Kant is also moral progress, from civilization, cultivation to moralization. And this is can be done by religious people who are morally, maybe they are morally more, how to say, engaged with the ideas of morality, but naturally also, as we see in the writing of Perpetual Peace, you see that he argues, that Kant argues for the moral politician. He tries to explain that there is no contradiction between morality and politics, and that he feels this necessity to argue that there is no contradiction shows, I think, that he doesn't want to relate them directly, both worlds of religion and of politics. But I think you can better understand what he by this ideal of ethical community. You have more information, so to say, to make an imagine of what it means to live this moral community with others. And it's not necessarily a visible church or a religion historically put. That's my impression.
Could I follow up real quickly on that? So as you were giving your answer, it occurred to me that my question wasn't quite as specific as it should have been. And you did respond to what I asked. But I wonder if you could go a step further and talk or address the further question about the end of human history. So if we're looking at Kant's theory of history and the development of the human race towards enlightenment, et cetera, do you see him as arguing that some kind of a political organization being arranged in the proper way is a step on the way to a religious reality? Or do you see him as arguing that a religious organization of some kind is a step on the way to a political reality? Some people have argued one or the other, as if there's a progression. And I'm just wondering if you think that Kant does argue for a progression, either from politics to religion or from religion to politics, or perhaps do they both come together necessarily, or are they completely independent? So my real question is about the end of human history. For Kant, in the ideal, and of course, you very correctly and skillfully explained Kant's view that the reality of humanity is, it's in one way, Kant is quite pessimistic because he acknowledges that it's never really going to work as well as reason tells us it should work. But then again, there's this side of Kant where he shows us this ideal, and he says, even though we know it's not going to work, we should still try. We should still hang the carrot in front of the proverbial horse, to make ourselves run harder and work harder. So could you address the same issue, but with a view towards human progress in a historical context towards the ultimate goal of enlightenment? Are religion and politics just independent factors, or is one the precondition of the other?
I think that they are, in a certain way, really independent factors, because there are two ways to work. There are two ways to work on this progress. You can the last decision, I think, will be politics, because if you if the world is destroyed, it's destroyed. Huh? You cannot see how individuals may have such an effect on the world situation. Individuals are religious, and the churches you find historically will in the end of the history will not no more exist. He says that the church as an institution, as a visible institution, will be überflüssig. Yusuf? Überfluss?
Gereksiz.
Superfluous, yeah. Superfluous.
Yes.
Yes, because we cannot change this institutions to the ideal. They are, and they stay, and they rest always trials of this this realization of morality. And so I think people have to become more conscious of their reasons, of a reason, and it's necessary to believe and to stay convinced that reason is right and has right and keeps right in the end. And therefore this this belief is not only a religious belief, but a belief in reason, and insofar also a belief in natural religion. And this natural religion, or religion of reason, rational religion is another point, but religion of reason, this is the same in fact as moral life, as realization of morality. And so we have in the inner situation will become, maybe will proceed to be more moral, and so far also the world may be a better world by this development of human beings, but they are not you cannot see this in an empirical way, to say religion is the effect of politics, or this mutual relation is really like apple and pears, because you have inward and outward conditions to compare. And I'm not sure how to you have to decide. If you say one develops in the other form, you to decide if you see this by in an empirical way, or just in this theoretical way. And in the theoretical way, there is no possibility, I think, to save religion as we know it now. It's just what will remain if progress is realized, is this moral consciousness of human beings, which will be more strong or more clear than than it's now. But I think you cannot decide. You can no more distinguish in the end morality and a religious attitude, because you have nothing else than this religion, natural religion of reason. And this is something, anything other side than we have today on religious developments, I think.
Margit, if I may add to Stefan's question something. Kant does not have plenty of writings in politics and in law, but towards the end of his life, above all in Rechtslehre, there are certain passages where you feel the pessimistic feeling of him, where he writes approximately like this: it is even not worth to live in a world like this, where the people are getting morally worse and worse. So there are some passages like this. So he's getting more pessimistic more and more. Would you agree with this? And do you have any reason for this? Why is that so? How did he develop towards 1790s?
I think it's the same development that we all know. We all make the experience growing older that our optimism and maybe enthusiasm of youth goes away more and more. And I think it's a normal development that you see that you struggle for ideas, you struggle for enlightenment, and you see always this dialectic in between empirical and ideal positions. And therefore, I think that the belief he speaks about is really a very abstract belief in reason. And I think this he kept until the end. I don't think that he lost his belief in reason, but you cannot comment political developments and also this theory of rights is very. There are lots of empirical arguments. He has to leave his reflections on ideal situations, and he has to. I think he tries to explain by examples and so on. And I think this shows very good that he is. He's also, he can be influenced and impressed by the facts of life, but but yes. he tries always, I think, to struggle on for this aims of a situation of Rechtsstaat, of a status juridicus all over.
Look what Stefan wrote. I think it was Mark Twain who once wrote, "The only thing worse than a young pessimist is an old optimist." Thank you, Stefan. Okay, any other questions? Some more questions? Let's see the other side. or any other comments?
Yeah, maybe I can ask a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I just would like to refer that, you know, political rulers, for example, should care about religion for Kant and consider it a guide or sources of inspiration for their own policies. And on the other hand, Kant apparently held a quite different or opposite view. According to whom, for example, political rulers must impartially respect the pluralism of religious faiths present in any given society. What should think this kind of ideas, two different ideas, some possible implications of this outlook? What do you think? Political rulers must in the first place safeguard fundamental human rights for Kant, or what do you think about that? And because Kant also claimed that the greatest problem for the human species is the solution of which nature compels him to seek is that of attending a civil society which can administer justice universality. On the other hand, what should we think his thoughts on political rulers, pluralism, secularism? How can we interconnect that ideas? Is it clear? My question is that clear?
There was a part I couldn't get acoustically in the beginning. The reaction of Sanya has been this smiley, but I couldn't understand the first.
Can you hear me well? Because my connection is not stable for now. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just would like to refer that Kant's thoughts both on pluralism and the thought that about political rulers who should care about religion, political communities. You already ethical communities. You have already referred it, and considering it a guide or source of inspiration for their own policies, for example. And I think it may a contradiction between his pluralistic view and his thought on religious communities, because it easily the political or religious communities can easily turn to, how can I say, mass society, for example. It's not, maybe it's not Kant's terms, but we know that it can easily turn for example, political communities, ethical communities. You referred that ethical communities is greater, is larger than political communities. But if we begin from the religious communities to reach the ethical communities, it may be a big problem, because political rulers can mobilize people to their own interests, for example.
I think I understand what you want to say, but there is one misunderstanding. There are no ethical communities in plural existing. Ethical community is just one, and it's an ideal. It's just an idea. It doesn't exist. What exists are religious communities in form of visible churches, for example. This is existing. And there are similar structures to political communities. And the political communities have other aims because they have to care for everybody's freedom, outer freedom, and they have to care for this by laws. And those laws are higher than other inner stately communities as religious churches also. So they are independent. You have to, the state has to accept religious practices, but just in so far they are not disturbing the freedom of others and the juridical laws, because the legislation is ideally an expression of the will of the people, and this will is law-giving in political communities. For the ethical community in singular, you can say that there is just one lawgiver, and this is the idea of a lawgiver who is divine, because you cannot imagine any human being which is able to have such a reason to find ethical or moral law. This is, I think, the old idea Kant uses here, but he doesn't concrete this, or he doesn't give there any he argues just very restricted on this. You need a lawgiver with a reason higher than all human reason, and you can call this lawgiver divine lawgiver or God. And this is not the God of one religion, of one visible church. It's a reasonable idea, and it's the God of the religion of nature, natural religion of reason. So, and therefore the rulers who use existing religious structures as churches, as religious communities, and so on, for their own aims or for political aims, they are, as Kant says, political moralists. They seem to be moral, and they seem to accept moral rules, but indeed they just use the sentiments and the feelings of religious people to political aim. And this is not moral development. With Kant, it's what all politicians normally do, who don't care for this moral progress. And they have not to care for moral progress of the inhabitants of a state. It's not the job they have to do. They have to care for this public space of freedom, where morality can develop in different forms, also in the form of religious communities. But they have to let each other free, and they all are in the outer world, in the empirical world, under the laws of the state, but in this moral world of ideas, under this the laws of this divine idea, which says that all maxims I have just are to subordinate to the moral law. This is the first of my inner motivations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margit.
So, yes, Sanye,
Saniye.
a third question?
Thank you very much. My question is about the realizability of these ideals, because you emphasize that these are ideals, right? The ethical community, or ideal political community, ideal religious community. And my question is, why do you think that they are going to remain ideal? And obviously you would accept that they have regulative purposes, right? That they are ideal, that we get closer to, but why deny their real possibility? Real possibility in the sense that their realizability on Earth. And I think when Kant talks about our duty towards these ideals, he sometimes talks about duty to attain them, sometimes duty to promote them, right? So, and I think that in the religion, he says that the human species has a duty towards itself to attain this idea. And assuming in the historical essays that the human species is immortal, etc. And I can imagine how they are realizable on Earth in an infinite time period. And here is how. So imagine that there's a patch of dirt on my tablecloth. And you might say, well, that tablecloth is dirty, right? But then I make this tablecloth larger and larger and larger and larger to the infinite, right? And at that point, you wouldn't think that that patch of dirt on the tablecloth would make the tablecloth dirty, because it is infinitely small and ignorable, right? So in a sense, that infinitely big tablecloth, I mean, obviously when I clean my clothes, it comes, I think, completely clean out of the washing machine. But obviously at the molecular level, there is dirt in it, right? But nonetheless, I consider it as clean. So similarly, why can't we just say that in an infinite period of time on Earth, that it is realizable, this ethical community is realizable on Earth? Because I mean, this emphasis on the, ethical community in the world, or highest good in the world, right? That world aspect, it seems like Kant thinks that it is realizable, or it is really possible. What would you say?
I would say that this is not possible because Earth is finite. You have no possibility to think an infinitely period of time when all human beings living at the same time on Earth are moral beings. I think this is the idea he which brings him to say that that we have to try to attain, and maybe we can go nearby by our own efforts, but we cannot imagine the moment when all human beings living at the same time in her small lives are at this optimum of ethical condition. So I think we have to think this process as an infinite process. Also, he says, Kant says that we have to wait some 100 years. I think we have, it's really a kind of infinite process. And therefore he, maybe you can compare this to this idea of the world republic. Now you can also discuss about the reality of, or realizability of the world republic. There are arguments for and against, but I think at least he says this is an idea, and we can think this idea, but we cannot imagine how it works, and if it works, whether it works. And I think it's the same thing with this ethical ideal, and ideals are thought for initiating a development, for motivating, but it's a kind of their characteristics that they are always unattainable as ideal. But maybe we can have really a better world where religion and politics goes without conflicts hand in hand, where more or most of the people living at the same time are in a way developed that they respect each other, that human rights are respected, and so on. These are ideas I think we can consider them as rational, or ideas of reasons. We remain believing in them, but I cannot imagine that Kant sees this what he calls an idea or ideal as realizable in a way as we can imagine that republics all over the world are realizable. This is in the outer, and this is the condition. I think it's creating this public space for moral development is the first condition, and then maybe that religious and political aims go more and more together, but religious in this sense of ethical. But I cannot imagine that he would agree to this, and me not too, because I have another understanding of this term of ideal. Huh? But it's not in reality and in the empirical world, it's not excluded that there is a moral progress in a way we cannot imagine now, seeing wars around of us and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
You said both the realization of the legal political community and the actualization of the ideal ethical community are continually frustrated. So worldwide, and also in our country, we live this frustration day by day. I think Stefan wants to ask something. Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm asking or just commenting on Margit's last response to Sanya. My comment is that, two comments really. One is that Sanya's metaphor of the tablecloth reminds me of Kant's reason for including immortality as one of the three basic ideas of reason, which, you know, a lot of people, most of us never talk about that idea, partly because Kant hardly ever talks about it. But when he does talk about it, I think that's the reason. The reason it's not just God and freedom that Kant cares about, but also immortality, is that it's only, is that Kant, you know, Kant is, he never tires of telling us that something is only a duty for us if we can conceive of it as being possible. And so I think his point is the possibility of this ultimate realization of the goal of the ethical community is one that we can conceive of only in eternity, only when that tablecloth becomes so huge that each of our individual flaws become invisible in the whole tapestry. So that was just a comment that I think immortality is a perspective that is there in Kant explicitly, even though he hardly ever makes much of it. And my second comment is only that what you said right at the end of your response there, Margit, was really exactly what I was thinking of when I asked my question about which one is the condition of the other. And I kind of guessed that you were going to answer my question by saying that they're kind of independent. But just now you gave the answer that I think is Kant's answer. In other words, what I completely agree with what you just said, namely that the political community is the precondition, not for religion, because you know, we see religion in, as you mentioned, in horrible forms, non-ethical forms all around us. But the precondition for a religious community that would transform itself into the ethical community is political freedom. And so anyway, I just wanted to affirm that as being what I had in mind with my question. So my question was kind of loaded.
Thank you. Maybe I changed the position. Empirical and ideal arguments where didn't fit together. Yes, thank you. And the idea of the immortality is right, because you have another ideal there. This is the highest good. Huh? You cannot attain this. It's comparable to the ethical ideal, but you have to think it. It's reasonable to think it, huh? And to believe in the realization in another world, or not in this world, so to say.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Sebastian, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the comment. I have a number of questions, but I think the one most germane to where the discussion has been going now is I wanted to ask how you, Professor Ruffing, see how the individual moral agent should act in order to enter into a moral religious community, which is like one of the obligations that Kant articulates there. And I think, I mean, the reason why I'm asking in particular is that you say that the idea of the religious community seems to be this very abstract and ideal that, you know, one sort of strives but is never really instantiated. But it seems that in order for me to be able, as a moral agent, to be able to act on this obligation, to enter into moral community, I have to be able to see which of the moral community, or which of the particularly existing churches or whatever religious communities that exist actually instantiate that idea better in particular. And I think if we take into account the problems articulated in parts 1 and 2 of the religion, this becomes even more pressing in a way, because Kant does seem to assume a lot of the metaphysics that would sort of just like make one conclude that, oh, it has to be a Christian religion, it has to be a sort of a particular sort of Christian church, and so on. So how do you see then to reconcile those sorts of problems in Kant's text with saying that, oh no, this is just an ideal form of community that cannot really be instantiated?
The religious communities, the existing religious communities, try to attain this ideal, and they try it explicitly, while the political communities have other aims, as I said. So you are right saying that a moral actor has to, human being, moral acting human being, has to take her own decisions to live the morality in the possibilities or in the real given conditions. That's clear. And so you have to, I think it's necessary, knowing that we cannot, we are other way around. If I think living in a religious community with rules, I believe, I'm convinced of their truthfulness, and I'm convinced that doing this, what this religious community says and explains and lives, makes me a moral agent and makes me perfect. If I believe this, I'm not right. And this is the point Kant always tries to make conscious, I think. You have the critical distance to all communities, existing communities, is more necessary than attaining a community which reclaims for itself being moral, religious or anything else. And so I think you have to decide by yourself how to live this these moral duties, and where, in which context, and under which conditions, and with whom you can do this at the best. And then you have to join, or you can join existing community or political party or church, or that's more similar than different in this way, and to live your morality, to live your moral convictions, which are, if they are Kantian, universal and rational, or reasonable also. And you go ahead to promote the ideal, or to promote this ideas of this ethical ideas Kant explains in his practical philosophy, and to or as the second critique says, to promote the good in the world, knowing that it's not possible to arrive or to attain this ideal in your life, no? But you contribute to the progress, to the general progress, and you have to bear the frustration. You have to hold your belief in reason, and you have to go on seeing that you cannot live always. You are disturbed by the others, so to say. As he says, if you imagine one human being, it's good, but in fact, 2 or 3 together, and the things get worse. Huh? And this is fact. At the same time, we cannot judge that it's so important that we can let it be what is going on. Huh? I don't know if this is the question, or this.
I mean, it cuts close to it, I think. I mean, I think it's particularly because I'm thinking sort of just like, well, you cannot be obligated to do anything that is impossible to do. So in some sense, it has to be possible to recognize instantiation of that particular kind of community in the world, so that it would be, one would feel that one should enter into community there in order to become, well, a better person, just like to put it very colloquially as such. But yeah, that would seem then that, just like there has to be some features within that community in how people treat each other, and how people cultivate a certain sense of humility and those sorts of things that would make it possible then to recognize, aha, here is something, it's not the ideal, but it's close enough to it that it's worth entering into it.
Mm. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? We are now getting towards the end. If there are no more questions or comments, I would, before I thank to Margit again, I would like to apologize because I mentioned in the beginning of the session only Kant Society of Turkey, who are organizing this conference, but with the Kant Society of Turkey also it is Dokuz Eylül University in Izmir, the Department of Philosophy. Both institutions have organized this event. So now I have to give the word to Edebiyat Fakültesi Dokuz Eylül Üniversitesi, to the organizers. I think they have something to say. Özlem Hocam?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Oz.
Thank you. First of all, good evening. We held our event organized by the Philosophy Department of Dokuz Eylül University and the Turkey Kant Society. Thank you to everyone listening. We would also like to thank our speaker and moderator, teacher. Don't forget to follow us on social media accounts. Thanks again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oz.
Özlem, what would you like to say?
Yes, thank you so much, Margit. We are very glad to have both of you, but especially Margit's talks. Thank you so much. It was very informative for us. And Yusuf Hocam, thank you so much to moderate this event. And I would like to thank all the participants. I hope to see you the future events, both Kant Society's events and Dokuz Eylül University Philosophy Department's events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margit. Also vielen herzlichen Dank, liebe Margit. After all these years that we meet each other again, we are far from each other geographically, but very close by heart. So I hope to see you again in the coming weeks when I come to Mainz. And yeah, our invitation is still valid, Margit. You come, I hope now pandemic is coming to an end. You're cordially invited, you and your husband, again to Izmir, and me and Özlem, we will bring you to Ephesus and to Miletus, where philosophy was born. So I hope you fulfill your promise to see us again in Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank to all of you. And again, for the patience with my poor English. And so I really hope that you thank you for your questions. I have to explain things a little clearer and think about one or the other point and a little more concentrated. And so I'm very grateful for you to have been here with you all. And I think if you have the occasion, the opportunity to come to Germany or to Mainz, we could always we are always there at the Kant Forschungsstelle to work together, to cooperate, to help, to connect and network and so on. And so if you have the impulse to contact me for whatever, you are free to do this and don't hesitate to do.
Thank you, Margit. I'm sure some of us, plenty of us, will come to Bonn to the next Kant Congress.
Mm-hmm.
2024, is that right? Yes. Before this 2023, we have a national congress in Antalya in February. Mm-hmm. It is already declared, but some of our colleagues might not know this. But there, Kant Society of Turkey will hold at least one session again. Mm-hmm. So this can be a good preparation for Bonn Kant Congress. Mm-hmm. I hope that we meet each other there with Kant specialists of Turkey in Germany. So I thank you all, everybody. Have a nice evening, and we hope to meet each other again.